for your book, you did investigation and you found out what's actually happened with the case. So have there been any leads? Has there been any success in tracing those leads? What's come out of it?
The investigations obviously took place. There were these joint investigations with various units coming together in JITs trying to establish what happened. Now, they were not, by any standard, thorough investigations. And if you read the reports that have come out of these JITs, they are really very, very insubstantial. But the fact is that there have been some arrests. And the name that's normally associated with this, Aitazar Shah, was arrested, in fact, in Dera Ismail Khan, and he wasn't in Rawalpindi on the day of the killing. But he was a backup bomber, and together with Husnain Gul, he remains in custody and will eventually, presumably, one day, come to trial. So as a result of those arrests and some others, there are confessions and there is evidence that's come onto the record.
But what led investigators to Aitazar Shah and this Husnain Gul?
Complete chance. He was actually caught trying to attack a Muharram procession in Dera Ismail Khan, and once the police actually got him, confessed to his involvement in the Benazir case. So it was a complete piece of good fortune by the police that they got him.
So you say his involvement. What was his involvement?
He was a backup bomber. He was just 15 years old, as indeed was the man who carried out the attack, was 15 as well. And he was simply one of the people that the Taliban had prepared to commit suicide and kill Benazir Bhutto. But in fact, he wasn't required because on the day, the boy who did it managed to kill just himself and Benazir, and there was a second bomber on the day who was in reserve in Rawalpindi, so Aitazar Shah was in reserve in another town for another occasion, but there were two who actually did it on the day, and the other one walked away and has never been found, actually. He's one of the few people who, in this whole case, hasn't yet been arrested or killed.
What do we know about the boy who was supposed to have been the bomber?
Well, I mean, he's not supposed to have been a bomber, Bilal. He was the bomber. He shot her first, and it's pretty clear from the evidence that's been out. There's obviously a huge controversy about whether there was a mass shooting or how many gunmen were involved, but it is my view, having looked at the films and seen the Scotland Yard investigation full report and various other pieces of evidence, the confession evidence from the boys and so on, that there was indeed one gunman who shot her and then blew himself up. He was son of a labourer from Karachi. He'd gone to the northwest looking for an opportunity of fighting jihad, and he was given that opportunity, and he indeed killed himself.
And he was very young.
Very young, 15 and a half years old. That's known from the bone evidence which was found on the scene and sent as part of the Scotland Yard investigation to scientists in the UK who did analysis of his remains and found that he was in fact 15 and a half years old.
And some people have questioned the trail that leads to Baitullah Masood. What do you think about that? Is there ambivalence about that?
I think there's no ambivalence about it at all, that he was indeed involved. The tape recording which the authorities released on the day or day after the killing, I have got that, and I have played it to people who knew Baitullah Masood and dealt with him. They think it is indeed his voice. It is a very authentic conversation, I believe, that took place between him and the Molvi who actually arranged the suicide bombers and trained them up. There is other evidence linking the Taliban to this killing. You may remember the kidnap of the Pakistani ambassador to Kabul, who was kidnapped in Khyber as he went through towards Kabul, and the demand, eventually he was passed on to the Taliban, who made the demand of the release of Aitazar Shah and some of the others who'd been arrested in relation to the killing. And so there are, and as the confession evidence also confirms that the Taliban were involved. Of course, the question is who commissioned the Taliban to do it.
There's some talk about a military establishment being involved or Musharraf's government being involved. Is there any evidence for that?
Well, there is evidence in the sense that let's call it either the deep state or the establishment, that some of these networks of senior military and bureaucratic leaders, the evidence that they may have commissioned this is simply that the cover-up was definitely attempted. So the scene was washed down, as we all know, and the UN found that their requests when they were investigating this for interviews were repeatedly blocked, and there were clearly attempts to prevent a proper investigation taking place. Now, it's really incomprehensible as to why that should happen with the PPP government in place, and it does suggest that those elements that were strong enough to organize the Taliban to do this were also strong enough to lean on the PPP and persuade them that they really should not investigate this.
So do you think the UN report or the Scotland Yard report have added anything to the investigation?
Scotland Yard report adds little. It's obviously highly controversial because it was seen as backing the government point of view. But having looked at it, and I mean, there is a sort of very strange issue as to whether she was shot dead or bombed dead. Of course, it doesn't matter at all because it was one boy who did it, and it makes no difference at all whether she was shot or bombed. But if you read the Scotland Yard report in full, it makes quite a convincing case for saying that she was killed by the bomb. I have to say I've seen the pictures and it looks to me like she was shot. So, I mean, it remains an open question and is unresolved, but it is a pretty irrelevant question because the fact is she was killed by this boy. So that report really stands on that fact. And then the UN report was, I thought, by UN standards, a really very good document, and it did point the picture. It first of all said that they were blocked quite explicitly, stated that they were blocked, which is an important fact. And secondly, it did name, as the term they used was the establishment, as having some involvement in this, and it did speculate as to sort of try to draw attention to the fact that there is such a thing as a sort of unaccountable establishment, and that there was reason for believing it was involved. So, I mean, it didn't manage to name the people in the establishment who they thought were responsible, but it did, I thought, go much further than I expected a UN report to do.
Critics of the present, the People's Party government, are always going on about how Benazir's murder has not been solved and how her killers are not being brought to justice. What would be the logical conclusion of this case?
Well, I mean, I think you can understand why that frustration exists. I mean, Zardari took over just after her death. He had all the levers of state at his command, and many people thought that he would do this, that he would see this as his responsibility to investigate her murder and to find out who was responsible. Now, it hasn't happened. And, we can only speculate as to why. I mean, it may be that he just made a calculation that this was going to cause so much trouble with some extremely powerful people in Pakistan that it wasn't worth his effort, that the important thing was to promote his son looking ahead rather than investigate his wife looking backwards. It may just be that he's afraid of meeting the same fate. I don't think we can discount that as a factor. After all, someone killed his wife and presumably they could kill him too. So it is unclear exactly what has motivated this lack of effort to investigate it, but it is pretty clear that there has been no proper investigation.
But having said that lack of effort, we know the names of the attackers, we know where the plot was hatched, we know who was informed.
Yes, I mean, we know a lot. I having looked at it pretty closely, I'm absolutely confident the Taliban did it, and I'm sort of less confident, but pretty sure that they were commissioned to do it. And what is the mystery really comes in on who commissioned them to do it, and there is simply no hard evidence relating to that. You can say there's evidence of a cover-up, but what is being covered up, we don't know. It has been a successful cover-up, and we will, I suspect, never know who commissioned the Taliban to kill Benazir Bhutto. Of course, people who are organising this kind of thing are very careful to leave as few traces as possible, and they have frankly successfully done that.